Hey, I'm Nick.
And I'm Allie.
And this is But Have You Tried from the David A. Howe Public Library. It's Star Trek Day, adjacent. Are you excited about talking a little Star Trek today?
I am.
Okay. Allie's assignment today is Star Trek The Cage, which is the original pilot way back in the 60s, before Star Trek was a twinkle in anybody's eye. This was the first...
I mean, arguably, this was the twinkle.
This was the twinkle. You're right.
Yeah.
You're right. This
Yeah.
was the twinkle in Gene Roddenberry's eye. He made a Star Trek show, and NBC was like, well, not that Star Trek show. Try another one.
Right? Like,
And then-
try again.
And
Try again.
then we got William Shatner and all the magic that happened afterwards. So The Cage kind of sits in a weird place, and I'm interested to see what you think. Update me. What is your Star Trek intake these days? Are you doing any Star Treks in your own free time?
Not regularly.
Okay.
I feel like Star Trek is one of those things that it's like, it's always there. It's kind of like a we'll always have
Comforting.
Paris sort of situation.
It's comforting.
Yeah, but like it's not often that I'll like do a whole pass through Star Trek, but like
Have you ever done that? Like, have you ever sat down with a show and like, I'm going to watch this start to finish?
the whole.
Yeah, whatever. Any of the series.
Well, the issue is that most of the shows that I've watched, like with an eye to
Yes.
watch most of the show,
Yeah.
I've watched with my family, and certain members of my family, who shall remain nameless, wimp out very quickly after a couple seasons. They get bored.
I thought you were
and
going to say
then-
they watch without you, but no. They get
Sometimes
bored.
that happens too. More so in recent years because I'm not like,
Yeah.
I've been like
living your own life.
living my own life, quite
Metropolitan life
literally.
here in Wellsville. Yeah.
But before that, it'd be like we'd start watching, say Next Gen, and we'd get a couple seasons deep, and then
A
someone
couple
would be
seasons
like,
of Next Gen is pretty rough, though. Seasons 1 and 2 are not their finest points.
yeah. I
So
don't
you
know.
never have. You never have.
I don't
sat
know.
down
I
and-
don't think I've ever watched an entire. Because then, like, we'd watch something else for a while, and then we'd pick up where we left
Okay,
off and
gotcha.
keep going for a little while,
Gotcha.
or we'd just watch random episodes.
All right,
so
let's run through. Okay, Star Trek the original series. What have
I've
you
watched some of it.
handful?
I don't know how much.
Star Trek the animated series from the 70s.
Nope.
Okay, Next Gen.
Yeah, I'd say probably most
Most
of it is my guess.
Deep Space Nine,
I also probably most of it.
Voyager,
Some.
Enterprise.
And
What about New Trek? Like, well, you watched Picard. You
I watched
all
season
of Pic-
3 of Picard,
just
but
season
not
3
the,
of Picard.
not the first two
Okay,
seasons.
all right.
Because Caleb was like, yeah, the first two seasons, but
Totally
it seems like
irrelevant.
the third season might be like kind of
Yeah,
fun.
right.
So we watched that,
It
and
was
it was
kind of
fun.
I'll say
Yeah.
that. It was kind of fun. Lower Decks,
Nope.
Discovery,
Nope.
Strange New Worlds.
Nope. Although
Okay.
I am curious about that now.
You should be. Well, I have never watched through Deep Space Nine. It's probably the biggest hole in my Trek knowledge because I have not watched a lot of it.
I really like it. It's one of my favorites.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I keep we're watching through it right now, but it's like we watch one episode every 6 weeks. 'Cause
Yeah, I understand.
I'm
how
just
that
not
goes.
that into it. So
I mean, it
No.
is hard to if you're watching something really spread out like that. I feel
Yeah.
like Deep Space Nine has a lot of the stuff that I like about Next Gen, but
Gotcha.
like, I don't know, the different setting I find really interesting. The
Yeah.
they're not exploring; they're like in mostly one location,
yeah.
dealing with stuff, and some of the like having the whole like Bajoran thing going on. I think is interesting, and some of the characters I really like Jadzia
Okay.
Dax.
I think this
No
is an
complaints.
unpopular opinion that I've stated before, but I feel like Next Gen maybe ages the worst.
Yeah,
It has that sort of late 80s, early 90s energy about it in a way that I don't think Deep Space Nine does necessarily.
I do feel like Deep Space Nine feels a lot more timeless somehow.
And maybe the original series is just so old and so iconic that it just kind of
I
is
think
its own
it's
thing.
I think
I
it's
mean,
passed into that
Yeah.
stage where it's like it's
Right.
not old anymore.
It's like listening to
it's
Frank
vintage.
Sinatra. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? You're not comparing it to.
Although I do feel like anytime I go to watch like an original series episode, I have to like it takes me a minute to like get in
yeah.
it. You know,
True. Yeah. Well,
Because
they're
the style
all
is just so different from.
at least 15 minutes too long. Easily.
that's fair.
Easily.
I feel like sometimes the way that Star Trek presents itself, it's like the start of any episode feels very much of that, like, Federation
Yeah,
sort
yeah.
of like organization
Right.
stuff. And then it like gets into the interesting stuff as the episode goes along.
Yeah.
I don't know why we don't just start with that.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
that's my
Give me
hot
your
take.
top 3 to 5 Star Trek characters across all eras.
Oh boy.
I did not prep her for this question.
No,
Everyone.
you did not.
You already said Jadzia Dax.
Yeah, we
and I
can
know
keep
how
Jadzia
you. I know how
Dax.
you feel about Beverly Crusher.
I don't know if she'd make my top 3, but I do really like her.
She's got nothing going on, so I don't.
I
all
do
right,
also.
Jadzia.
I really like Troy.
I like Troy. I think I'm so influenced by the books that characters like Troy, for example, who in the original series or, in Next Gen, doesn't get a ton of certain parts of her character are never really developed.
Yeah. Like, she's very cool, but she always feels a little bit like they don't really want to put her in the game the whole way.
They
Like,
never can decide like what her power level is either.
That's true.
It's like
Because sometimes it's like she's almost like God level
yes,
power, and
she
other
can
times
read
it's
minds,
like
she can
she's like,
communicate.
I feel sadness.
Yeah,
like,
someone
okay.
is sad. I need to lay down.
It's like, well, I
Yeah.
knew that just from watching what's happening,
Yeah.
but I think I'll take Data as my third.
Okay. Yeah. All right. A character like Troy or Tom Paris from Voyager, are so fleshed out in the books in a way that I can't separate those things from my mind because I've read a million Star Trek books. So, it's I'm not breaking news, but the original like 6, and I'll throw Generations in there, movies to me is like the pinnacle of Star Trek. And of New Trek, it's hard to say. I love Strange New Worlds. I also love Lower Decks just so much. So there's a lot of good things going on. I don't know why you haven't watched Lower Decks. I don't know why I haven't made you. I don't know why I haven't used the power of this show to make you watch Lower Decks.
You literally have the power.
I know. Well, with great power. You know.
It's true.
I honestly thought about Lower Decks for this episode, but I just feel like there's something about the cage, just because it is like proto Star Trek, and what the cage like tries to do in that episode, I think is just so interesting to have that in your mind. It's like, this is where all this began.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
Speaking of where it began, would you like to hit me with some facts about
I will hit
the
you
cage?
with some facts. Wait, first you have to tell me your 3 favorite characters. If I have to tell you mine,
You're right.
you have to make some
that's only
decisions
fair.
too.
That's only fair. I love Kirk, and I feel like that's so obvious. I love Kirk, and I particularly love that Kirk, Spock, McCoy triangle that they have. Like just that triad of personalities is so perfect together. It's hard to separate that. So I love Kirk. I love Deanna Troi. I really do. Like for Next Gen, absolutely, and I'd put her in the top tier. And I love Janeway. I just think she's so great.
She's probably one of the ones I have the least familiarity.
Oh, really?
With. Yeah.
Okay.
Because most of the Voyager that I watched like long
Sure.
ago, and I don't remember that well.
Voyager was kind of my first interaction with really, truly episodic Trek, because it was on in syndication when I was in college, and we'd all watch it together. And so it was like I was waiting for the next episode.
That's
it
fun.
wasn't like, how many do I want to stream today? You know what I
Right,
mean? It was
yeah.
like, will UPN show it, or will it be, will some sports run into it and they won't show it? So I have a lot of fondness for Voyager because of that. But I think Janeway is just such a complex character. Like, she comes from a science background and sort of goes into command, and her approach to command is so different, and the way she tackles problems and deals with the other characters. In some ways, I feel like she's the most complex of the captains, and I just think it's just such a great character. One of the reasons why I love Prodigy as well, just having like Janeway back in my life, is I appreciate it.
Fair enough. I'm also going to tell you my least favorite character across all of Star Trek.
All right.
Q.
Oh.
Can't stand him.
Yeah.
I hate him.
There's a lot of Q episodes that I don't care to watch again.
Like sometimes he can be fun for like 7 minutes,
Okay.
But most of the time it's like he comes in, he breaks all the rules, and there's like nothing that anyone can do to like actually handle the
I get
situation.
that.
Like, you have no tools to deal with
get
this.
that.
It's just like you're at the whim of Q,
Okay.
and I find him obnoxious.
I rarely want a Worf story. I'm not like, oh, it's a Worf episode. Yay.
I like Worf stories.
I don't really like Harry Kim on Voyager. I don't like
Quark,
anyone.
I also find
don't like
annoying
anyone
from
on
Deep
Deep
Space
Space
Nine.
Nine. So, that's that's tough.
You're a menace.
That's tough. All right, hit me with Cage facts.
Okay.
You're a menace.
The Cage was completed in January of 1965.
Yeah.
Were you alive then?
In January of 1965. No, my mom was born in January of 1965.
Oh, wow.
So,
That's crazy.
yeah,
She and the Cage are twinsies.
they are. Yeah.
Written by Gene Roddenberry and directed by Robert Butler.
Okay.
Like you said, this was rejected by NBC in February of 1965. So, like, quick turnaround there. They were like, we
Yeah.
don't like it.
Rewatching it, I do kind of get that decision.
That's fair.
Like, just it's a weird launch to a show to have the character outside of the norm. Like, you never really see Pike being the captain, and so to start with him being the captain and then being separated from the crew is a weird.
Like, it feels like a
lens.
Star Trek episode, but like a season 3, middle of the seasons kind of Star Trek episode.
It's like a sweeps episode where
Yeah.
it's like, let's do something big and different. So I do kind of understand that. But anyway,
And they created another pilot, which is Where No Man Has Gone Before.
yeah. I have some theories about that. I feel like they spent so much money building that set that they were like, we got to get something out of this. You know what I mean? We got to get
That's fair.
something. Let's run this back. Let's try it again. But-
Yeah. I mean, I kind of think it's cool that they did that rather than just like being like, well, we're scrapping it.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
I
I,
mean, it
feel
was a
like
good
taking
decision.
something that has potential and workshopping it rather than just being like, well, it's not quite there,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
we're just gonna not.
Yeah.
It's cool. Spock was the only character who was the same actor in the same role
Yeah.
in both the Cage and the original series,
Yep.
which is, I think, really interesting that, like, of all the things you would preserve, it would be Spock in
Spock.
particular, especially because he's not quite Spock yet.
No, he's not. That laughing scene always stands out. You know,
Yeah.
when he's by the flowers. I forgot until this rewatch that he has the first line, which is kind of cool. Like
is
he has
cool.
the first line in all of Star Trek as Spock.
And I feel like he's so iconic, it kind of makes
Oh,
sense
yeah.
that he would.
But it doesn't make sense. Like,
I
it's only
know.
coincidence.
I
You
know.
know what I mean?
It makes sense in
You're
retrospect.
right. Yeah, it does.
Okay. Footage from The Cage was eventually reused in the two-parter The Menagerie, which now I
Yes.
kind of watch. I might have seen it at some point, but if I have, I sure don't remember.
Yeah,
it.
it's kind of the look of Pike in like the chair, like an immobilized Pike is. Yeah, if you've seen it before, when you see that image, you'll be like, right, of course.
Okay.
It is good, and like the added context, they work it in pretty well. They don't really explain Spock being smiley, but
Just like it was a weird day
yeah, it's just
for
off.
a
Yeah,
Vulcan.
it's off. I have read some books that explain it. Vulcan's Heart, if anybody's interested. Vulcan's Glory, another good one. I watched the Menagerie in theaters.
Huh.
There was like a Fathom Events kind of thing, and it showed that two-parter up on the big screen, and it was very cool to see that way.
That is kind of cool.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, The Cage was eventually released on VHS, good old VHS,
Yeah.
in 1986 as kind of like here's,
Yeah.
an interesting thing with some like commentary from Gene Roddenberry,
Yeah.
which I think is kind of fun.
Yeah.
And then in 2019, the Discovery episode, If Memory Serves, shows Pike and Spock returning to the planet that they visited in the Cage.
That was a cool moment because it was like previously on Star Trek, and it was
And they just show scenes from the Cage.
it was like Discovery scenes and also the Cage scenes, and just kind
was
of
it like
mixing it all
weird, the
together.
like contrast and like filming style and stuff?
Probably
or just
if you
kind
didn't
of
know
like,
what was going on, it would be like it
Fair
doesn't. You would
enough.
never be like, oh, these are the shot at the same time. But
Right.
it's like an if you know you know situation. It was
Huh.
cool, because it's so pivotal for Pike, obviously. So
Right, yeah.
you know,
Okay. And after a positive fan response to that episode
Yes.
with the new castings of those characters,
yeah,
CBS All Access ordered Strange New Worlds
yes,
in May of 2020, which features Pike, Spock, and Number One.
Yep.
55 years after The Cage.
it's a long time.
That's a long time.
It's a long time later
That's a
to
long time
finally
to
sort of
wait.
like realize that original version of Star Trek is.
Right?
It's bizarre. And I've seen the Cage in different formats over the years because there was a thing where it was like part of they only had the footage that they used in the Menagerie, and then they had like a black and white work print, and they put them together, and then the excise scenes were found and they put them back together. So there's a couple different ways that I've seen it over the years.
Man, that sounds
You
just
know.
like chaos of like, oh, we don't know where this footage is.
You know,
we're using
I-
black and whites.
I started working in libraries when I was a teenager, and I was up. I don't know if I was shelving. I didn't shelve media very much, so I don't think so. Not that that's relevant. I was looking through the shelves, and I saw Star Trek: The Cage as its own VHS, and I was like, "What the heck is this?" And like Pike was on the cover of it, and I'm like, "Who is this person?
Right.
Why does Spock look weird? What am I looking at?" I had no idea what it was. So I checked out the VHS from the library and watched it at home, and it kind of blew my mind. I was like, I don't even know what I'm looking at right now.
Right?
So that's how I found
With just
it
like
at
no
all.
context, just like here it is.
No, I think it said episode 0 maybe or
Okay.
something like that. It just was, I hadn't even heard of it. I didn't know that was a thing at all.
Right.
So-
Well, I mean, I didn't know it was a thing until a month
so
ago.
it really caught me off guard. But I've always liked it, and like I showed my wife, and my son watched it with us this time, and he was pretty interested in it, and I think it holds up pretty well. But I think that it also presents a very different vision of what Star Trek is, and it's almost fits better. Like it kind of makes sense with New Trek because it almost fits a little bit better the way the characters are treated with like kind of how Strange New Worlds is. So it's just it's a little kooky. So you checked it out. How did you watch it?
I watched it on Paramount Plus,
Okay,
and the
All
app
right.
didn't crash partway through, so
good.
that was nice.
Good. You watched it. Okay, well let me have it. What do you think?
I thought it was really interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. There were a number of things that I didn't expect. Like I wasn't really sure what to expect from Pike.
Yeah,
I thought he was kind of an interesting character.
yeah,
And I think switching from Pike to Kirk, I don't know. Like they
Yeah.
have some similarities, but they also, I feel like they feel very different
Oh,
just
yeah.
in their like aura.
yeah.
And I thought having a woman as number 1 was really interesting.
Yeah, especially for the time.
Right?
Yeah.
And I'm kind of sad that didn't carry over into the original series.
Right.
I read an anecdote that was like NBC told Roddenberry, like, you can keep the guy with the weird ears with a woman, like not both.
Mm.
And then he eventually married the actress who played
Yeah.
her.
Yeah.
So,
That's
you know,
true. Yeah. And I mean, she shows back up as Nurse Chapel pretty quickly.
Right.
And,
she voices a lot of the computers,
yes.
and she plays Troy's mom,
Yes,
which I
that's
didn't
right.
realize until I was reading things today. I
Yeah.
like went into this whole
Yep.
Wikipedia spiral. So that was an interesting
Yeah.
thing for me to realize. But
one of the things I really like about it, and again, it's weird for a pilot, but I like how introspective Pike is.
Mm-hmm.
Like to see him, a relatively young guy, just kind of be like, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. Like, I don't know if I want to keep making all these decisions and like, blah, you know, it's
which makes
interesting.
perfect sense that like piloting, you know, just like a little
Yeah.
a little bathtub in the stars,
Yes.
you would feel that way.
Yes. Well, there's a scene in the cage where the doctor goes to see Pike, and it establishes pretty early on that they're friends, and you think he's getting medicine or something, but he like mixes a martini in a beaker.
I thought that
like,
was
you know.
funny.
And that's actually the first scene that was ever shot.
Huh.
Like the two of them. And it is, again, like it feels like a scene with characters that you've spent a season or two with.
Yeah.
You know, because it really like hits that relationship hard. And it's interesting to see the things that carry over because not Kirk, but the captain and the doctor having like this relationship does kind of roll over into Kirk and McCoy.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting
a
kind of
similar
parallel.
kind of relationship. And I've read things from Leonard Nimoy over the years, who played Spock, about saying that when he was like playing off of Jeffrey Hunter, who played Captain Pike, Hunter's energy was just very like clipped and serious and flat, not in a bad way, but just very like stoic. And so he kind of went in the other direction. And then when Kirk comes in, and Kirk is so boisterous and, you know,
Right.
big, that Nimoy kind of pushed Spock in the other direction to kind of like counterbalance. And
Right. Which,
so-
like, that contrast makes more sense
yeah,
for the Spock that we know,
Yeah,
like the
definitely.
idea of Vulcans that we have.
yeah,
Yeah, so it's really interesting, I guess, to think about how that would have played out differently
Yeah.
if Pike had stuck around
Yeah.
instead.
what would have happened had that pilot been picked up?
Mm-hmm.
Like, would it have been successful? Would it have, like, were they right or wrong to do what they did?
Yeah.
You know, because the original series pilot that comes after it, I don't think is really much better. It's another like very weird episode. But I don't know that like Star Trek would have become the thing that it came if they stuck with like Pike and the atmosphere of that original show.
It feels almost a little grittier in a way that I feel like is maybe less fun. You know, like less of
Yeah.
a like, oh yeah, I just want to watch this and enjoy this kind of thing. Which the thing that I saw cited for like why they were like, no, like we gotta redo
Yeah.
was that it was like too cerebral or like not actiony enough or anything.
Yeah.
Which I thought was interesting because that wasn't really what I was thinking while I was watching it. And I feel like in some ways the stuff where you have to like think about, you know, weird situations and ethical dilemmas and stuff is always a lot of what I really enjoy about Star Trek.
Yeah.
And I feel like it has that well. And so like, I don't know.
Yeah. It almost feels like the cage and Pike's general, like, this is taking too much of me. Atmosphere is sort of mirroring like the national depression that was happening in the world in 1965. I mean, we're 2 years past JFK's assassination. We're in like the heat of the civil rights movement. Like, it's rough, you know,
Yeah.
like it's a rough, unpleasant time. And I wonder if rather than being the escapism that Star Trek is, if that was kind of leaning into like the malaise that people were feeling. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because Star Trek goes on to have this very diverse cast, you know, in a time where that was
Yeah.
unusual. You know,
I think they clocked a lot of firsts in terms of
Yeah.
like television diversity.
yeah. I mean, you have a Russian character come in when we're like in Cold War era kind of
Right.
stuff. I mean, it's all that stuff is pretty bold, and I think the Shatner version of Star Trek is casting this big hopeful aspirational like someday we'll be here in a way that I don't think the Pike stuff
Yeah, I agree.
did. So maybe that's why like one took off and one didn't. I don't know what audience would have said if they would have saw Pike, but
Yeah, I don't know.
that actor died very young. He died not long after that episode, Jeffrey
That's really
Hunter.
sad.
Yeah. Who knows what that would have been for Star
Right.
Trek as well.
Yeah, that
But
could have thrown a really interesting wrench in things.
I think it works really well just as its own piece. Like, I think you can kind of watch it like a movie and be okay. And I think it works in the menagerie too, like in the context of the original series and stuff. And I like that in bringing that into the first season, you sort of now all that stuff really happened. It's not like a alternate, like, oh, what if this?
Right.
You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like it becomes like canon. Which
Yeah, I
always
think
feels,
making
you
it
know.
canon is a really interesting choice.
Yeah.
Because I feel like, I guess my expectation with something like this would be, you know, it just kind of disappears. It's maybe a
Yeah.
fun what if, whatever. And so I think tying it in the original series, and then of course like with some of the new Trek stuff, is a really interesting move.
Yeah.
That I wouldn't necessarily have expected.
Yeah. Well, you can kind of play on that history, and J.J. Abrams' Star Trek trilogy from 2008 and beyond, you know, that brings that Pike character in and shows you a different version of Pike, and it's nice to have that established history of like who was there before Kirk, and it just gives you a little bit of stuff to play with, you know, when you're looking at like the arcs of these characters and things. I mean, how do you think you'd rate it overall? What tell me some things that stood out to you as like blah.
As things I didn't like.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the sexism, but like that's just a product of its
Yeah.
time. Like I wouldn't say that the original series is much better
Yeah.
in that regard. So like, you know.
I do like how, because Pike says early on when the yeoman comes on, he's
Yeah.
like, I can't get used to having women on the bridge.
Yeah, he has a real attitude about it.
And number one is like, what the heck, you know? And he's like, oh, no, sorry. And then he's like, you're different. And she's like, well, that's not, you know, like you just see the look on her face. So I
Yeah.
kind of like that, like she's acknowledging
yeah, I
that
did think
he's
that was
being
cool.
sexist. But I mean, it's not an excuse.
Particularly
because
because I feel like that kind of like not like other girls stuff is something that for a long time people really leaned into and were like, yeah,
Yeah.
like this does make me cool,
Right,
instead of being like,
right.
this
Yeah.
is actually sort of offensive
Yeah.
to everybody.
Right.
But so yeah, I did think that was cool. But
It's undercut, I think, a little bit later when the Telosians are making him. Because essentially, if you haven't seen the episode, they land on this planet where they're expecting to find survivors, and it turns out that there's only one survivor who's been taken in by this group of Telosians, and they're essentially trying to find a mate for the human that they have in their little zoo. So that's the cage. That's the cage that we're talking about. And the Telosians are intent on having Pike, and Vina is the survivor's name, kind of be the new, like this new species to watch. And when that's not working, he pulls down number one and some of the other like women on the crew, and he's like, take your pick then of a mate. And some of that conversation I think undercuts
Yeah.
the original stuff, because it's
it's a
like,
weird dynamic for
Yeah.
sure.
maybe like it would have played better if we were a season or so in, when you'd be kind of wondering, like,
Right.
is there any kind of
Exactly.
like chemistry
But
between
it's
the
kinda
characters
too
or whatever?
soon
It is too soon
To get a sense of
yeah,
that, other than just that he's weird about the yeoman
Right.
being there.
right.
But like,
And it's
you know,
not a reveal to say what people are thinking if you don't know the characters. You know
right?
what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
they're like, oh yeah, these are, you know, this is what the women are thinking.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, well, I mean, I don't know if that
Yeah.
seems accurate to their character
Yeah.
or not. Maybe.
yeah. Okay, so the sexism, obviously. So
The
what
sexism
else?
is
What
a-
else
is a
stood
no
out
for
to
me.
you as like a?
I feel like some of the thing where they're like, because they can read people's minds and
Yeah.
they can like make these elaborate illusions that are like 3-dimensional somehow.
I guess, yeah.
I was a little confused by how that worked.
Right.
And I feel like that like wasn't necessarily like a total problem for me, but I was just like, I have some
Yeah,
questions
what
that
their
aren't
limits
exactly
are and
resolved.
stuff, yeah.
Because there's a scene where he like shoots his phaser at the like glass of the cage, and
Yeah.
he's like, I think that there's really a hole in that, in
Yeah.
the wall because I just shot it, and you know, you make it seem like my phaser isn't
Right.
working, and I could try shooting your head and seeing
Yeah.
if that, you know. And so then the like alien reveals the hole, and they like climb out and everything. But I'm like, if it's really there, shouldn't they be able to just climb out
Yeah.
anyway? Like
Yeah.
just feel.
Mhm.
It doesn't seem like feeling reveals the
Exactly,
true nature
yeah,
of
it's
something,
not fully.
which I
thought
think is
out,
an interesting concept. But definitely, I was like, I feel like I'm missing a little bit to kind of totally understand how that works
Yeah.
without being like, shouldn't they just be able to like stick their hand through the wall, you know?
Yeah.
But also some of the like scenes where they're like going to like some of his memories and playing them out weird, or some
Mhm.
of the like imaginary stuff. I just found those a little like whatever. Like
Yeah.
the whole scene where he's like fighting this like weird barbarian thing. I was
Yeah.
like, okay, whatever. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't really care
Well,
about
again,
this.
I think you have to have more buy-in to the character maybe than you have at this point.
I think that would help.
know?
And if it was even like, you know, you've had a bunch of episodes already and it's like playing back,
Mm-hmm.
you know, struggles that you saw the character go through
Yeah.
in previous episodes, but playing them out differently. I think that could be really interesting. But it is a little harder of a sell
Yeah, it's
in
like
a first episode.
it works to me. It works better as a standalone than it does as setting up a series because it's almost you've given away too much. You know, like you.
It feels like a character turning point, not like
yeah, not like an establishing.
Yeah.
Yeah. True. I'm glad it exists, and I'm glad like it's out there. I like having it in the menagerie, but I also like being able to revisit it just like as its own thing. I think is pretty cool, and I think if you're a Star Trek fan and you've never seen it, I think it's worth tracking down. Would you say?
Yeah, I think it'd be a
Okay.
fun watch. And I mean, if you're like deep in the Star Trek lore, then like
Yeah.
absolutely a great
Yeah,
interesting
and
thing
it,
to
you know,
pull.
it becomes more relevant now that with Strange New Worlds
Right.
and everything like that. It's,
Yeah.
you know, I wouldn't say it's necessarily required viewing, but it certainly adds a really nice context, you know, if you haven't seen it before. So, and it's cool that Spock makes the cut. You know what I
It
mean?
is cool that Spock makes the cut.
It's nice to have somebody who has like a foot in both versions of this, and it gives a little bit of a sense of continuity,
Yeah.
even if he's a little off.
Yeah.
You know? And it's really just the scene where they see like the singing flowers, and he gives a big cheesy grin. You know, like I think, and they even show that in the menagerie, which I feel like that would have been a clear place
Yeah,
to cut. Just
for
don't
sure.
show that.
Just don't
You're
show
okay.
it. It'd be easy.
But yeah, I like to see those characters realized, and I think probably my affection for the Cage adds to my enjoyment of Strange New Worlds. But I still stand by Strange New Worlds might be a good entry point for somebody who's never, you know, Star Trek'd before. I think that's a place you could go. Well, if you're interested in it, we do have the DVDs here, or as Ali said, it's on Paramount Plus, so you can check it out and watch it. I think you should. Sounds like you liked it. Is that where we're at? Is
Yeah.
that where we're landing? Okay. All right. But it's just sort of like an even, like,
Like, I don't think it's my favorite Star Trek thing of
Right.
all time, but like
Right.
I enjoyed it and I
as
thought
a
it was
historic
interesting.
document.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And
so
I might
guess.
check out Strange New Worlds. I'm
Okay.
intrigued now.
Yeah.
So
As well you should be. Yeah.
I feel like that was your devious master plan all along.
Yeah. Well, if it happens, it happens. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, well, I know that you like Star Trek.
I do.
Cage in particular.
Yes.
But have you ever read Chasing Vermeer by Blue Balliet?
I'm going to let you guess.
I'm going to guess no.
No, I haven't.
I didn't see a spark of recognition
No,
in your
it's like
eyeballs.
every word you said I was hearing for the first time. What did you say? What is it?
Chasing Vermeer by
Vermeer.
Blue Balliet, which I feel like must be a pen name, but
Okay.
I don't actually know for certain.
Okay.
This is like a middle grade novel. It's kind of a mystery, but with some almost magical realism adjacent elements. The idea is there's these two kids who live in Chicago and a painting goes missing and they decide they're going to find it. It's a fun, weird read, very puzzly. So,
Why did you settle on this?
Um,
This is an oddball.
yeah. This is one of my favorite. There's like this little
Oh.
like canon of Allie's favorite middle
Okay.
grade books that
Okay.
have, that I've read over and over through my
I
life
see.
and I still enjoy as an adult.
Okay.
And I like to spring them on people sometimes.
Okay.
And I think this is the fun one that I think you might like.
All right.
We'll see.
All
I'm
right.
curious.
I'll do it. I'll dive in.
Well, I'll be curious to hear what you think.
Well, you'll find out. In 2 weeks, we'll be back to talk about all the things we've been reading and watching. Probably a little more Star Trek for me because September 8th is Star Trek Day. So this could be the year you finish that Star Trek graphic novel.
It could
that you
be. And I
started
might check out the
a year
menagerie
ago.
as kind of a
Oh, yeah.
tie-in
Okay.
/
All right.
celebration.
That could
We'll
be
see.
cool.
Yeah.
That could be fun. Or Strange New Worlds.
Or
which
Strange New Worlds.
which we
We'll
have
see.
on
It'll be a
DVD.
surprise.
We have it on DVD here in the collection. Okay, well, until then, I've got some reading to do, so I'll see everybody in a couple of weeks.
Bye-bye.